here is something worth sitting with for a moment. Right now, you believe you are reading or listening to a description of the world as it is. The voice you hear, the words landing in your mind, the sense of a room around you. You assume these are direct transmissions, reality piped cleanly into your awareness. But they are not. What you are experiencing right now is a construction, a working model assembled in milliseconds from incomplete data, past experience, educated guesswork, and a library of assumptions your brain has been quietly building since before you could speak. You are not perceiving reality. You are perceiving your brain's best current version of reality. That distinction, small as it sounds, changes everything. Imagine you are walking through a train station. It is loud. Crowds move in every direction. Your eyes cannot track everything, so they don't try. Your brain selects. It filters noise. It fills in the faces it doesn't fully see. It decides, before you consciously choose, what matters and what disappears. Then someone across the platform calls your name. Instantly, you hear it, clearly, above everything else. Your brain was never passive. It was always listening for what it deemed important. It was always editing the feed, quietly, efficiently, without asking your permission. That is not a glitch. That is the system working exactly as designed. Now, why does this matter? It matters because most of the friction in human life, the misunderstandings, the blind spots, the conflicts, the moments where someone says, "How did you not see that coming?" trace back to this one mechanism. We don't argue about reality. We argue about our versions of reality, and neither person usually knows that's what's happening. The brain is not a camera. It was never built to record. It was built to survive. And survival doesn't require perfect information. It requires fast, confident, useful interpretation. The brain delivers that reliably every waking second of your life. The cost of that speed and confidence is this. The model it produces is not reality. It is a representation shaped by your history, your fears, your expectations, and your attention. Psychologists and neuroscientists sometimes describe this as predictive processing, the idea that your brain does not passively wait for sensory input and then react. Instead, it anticipates. It generates a prediction of what it expects to encounter and then checks incoming data only to confirm or revise that prediction. Think about what that means in practice. When you walk into a familiar kitchen, you don't consciously process every detail. Your brain says, quietly, "I know this place. I know where the counter is. I know that sound is the refrigerator." It has already filled in most of the scene before your eyes fully land on it. This is astonishing efficiency. It is also a profoundly creative act. Because here is what that means. The majority of what you perceive on any given day is not incoming data, it is outgoing prediction, lightly corrected by reality. You are in a very real sense dreaming your waking life, and occasionally waking up when the world surprises you enough to demand revision. This volume is about that process, the construction, the filtering, the narrative assembly, the creative, slightly unreliable, deeply human act of turning raw sensory noise into something called what happened. We will move through 5 key mechanisms: predictive processing, selective attention, sensory filtering, narrative assembly, and memory reconstruction, not as abstract concepts, but as things happening inside you right now, shaping what you believe is real, who you believe you are, and how you move through the world. None of this is cause for alarm. The brain's construction is, most of the time, extraordinarily good. The useful illusion is genuinely useful. It allows you to function, to connect, to create, to love. But the limits of the illusion are worth knowing. Because when you know how the construction works, when you understand the seams, you become a more honest observer of the world, of other people, and most importantly, of yourself. The saying goes, popularized by the writer Anais Nin in her novel Seduction of the Minotaur, though its origin runs deeper than any single author, we do not see things as they are, we see them as we are. 11 words, decades of cognitive science compressed into a sentence. What that phrase captures, and what brain research now confirms, is that perception is not neutral. It is personal. It is biographical. It carries the fingerprints of every experience that shaped you before this moment. And here is the invitation this volume extends to you. Not to distrust your perception, not to spiral into philosophical doubt about whether the chair you're sitting in is real, but to hold your perceptions a little more lightly. To ask occasionally, is this what is happening, or is this what I expect to happen? That question, asked with genuine curiosity and without self-judgment, is one of the most powerful cognitive tools available to a human being. It is the difference between a person who reacts and a person who chooses, between someone who is moved by the world and someone who can, at least sometimes, pause, notice the construction, and decide how to respond. That is not a small thing. That is a different life. So let us begin. Let's start with a question that sounds simple but isn't. When you open your eyes in the morning, what happens first? Most people assume the answer is you see. Light enters the eye, signals travel to the brain, and the brain produces an image. Input, then output. Stimulus, then response. But the sequence is almost exactly backwards. What actually happens, according to a growing body of neuroscientific research, is that your brain has already generated an expectation of what it's about to encounter. Before the incoming sensory data fully arrives, the brain has placed its bet. It has produced a prior, a prediction built from everything it has learned about what mornings look like, what your room looks like, what the light through your particular window tends to do at this hour. The incoming sensory data doesn't build the picture from scratch. It corrects the prediction, slightly, where necessary. This framework, called predictive processing, was formalized and extended by neuroscientist Carl Friston, whose free energy principle, published in Nature Reviews Neuroscience in 2010, describes the brain as a system that continuously minimizes the difference between its predictions and incoming sensory data. The foundational idea traces back to the 19th century physiologist Hermann Helmholtz, who described perception as an unconscious inference, the brain actively inferring the most likely causes of its sensory signals, rather than passively receiving them. Think of it like a very experienced navigator. The navigator doesn't look out the window every second to figure out where the ship is. They maintain a running model. We were here, moving in this direction at this speed, and glance at landmarks only to check whether the model still holds. When something surprises them, they update. Otherwise, the model runs. Your brain is that navigator, and most of the time, the model holds. The implications of this are vast, and we'll unpack them through the rest of this volume. But for now, hold on to one key idea. Your experience of reality is, in a literal sense, a hypothesis your brain is testing. Not a recording, not a mirror, a hypothesis. Consider Elena. She is a fictional composite offered here for illustration. Elena is a nurse, 12 years on a busy hospital ward. She walks into a patient's room at 6 in the morning for a routine check. The patient is sleeping. Everything appears normal. She begins the standard assessment, but something stops her. She can't name it immediately. The room looks the same. The monitors show acceptable numbers. No alarm has sounded. And yet, She calls the attending physician, insists on a second look. The physician comes, slightly reluctant, slightly skeptical, and within 20 minutes they have identified early signs of sepsis that the monitors had not yet flagged. What happened? Eleanor's brain, trained by thousands of patient observations, had a prediction for what a stable patient at 6 in the morning should look like. The incoming data deviated slightly from that prediction, not dramatically, not in any way she could have immediately articulated, but the error signal fired. Her experience was not mystical. It was not intuition in some inexplicable sense. It was predictive processing doing exactly what it's built to do, detecting a mismatch between expectation and reality. The experienced doctor, the seasoned teacher, the old coach who spots the injury before the athlete does. This is the mechanism behind all of them. Expertise in many domains is the refinement of prediction. It is the accumulation of a model so detailed and accurate that small deviations become loud. So here is a question worth sitting with. Where in your own life have you stopped noticing the mismatches, not because they disappeared, but because your predictions have become too fixed? Where have you stopped updating the model? And here is the harder question. Is there someone in your life, a partner, a colleague, a child, whose behavior you have stopped genuinely seeing because your brain decided long ago that it already knows who they are? Try this today. Choose one familiar environment, your kitchen, your commute route, your usual desk. Step 1. Enter it as if you have never been there before. Look for 3 things you have never consciously noticed. Step 2. Ask yourself, what has my brain been editing out here and why? Step 3. Notice whether anything you find changes how you feel in that space. This is not a dramatic exercise. It is a small act of perceptual honesty, and small acts of perceptual honesty, practiced consistently, produce genuinely different thinking. Now, we move to the brain's second great construction tool, selective attention. If predictive processing is the architect, generating the blueprint, then selective attention is the editor. It decides, moment to moment, which pieces of the incoming world make it into your conscious awareness and which are quietly discarded before you ever knew they existed. The numbers here are staggering. At any given moment, your senses are receiving an enormous volume of raw information from every surface your skin touches, every sound in your environment, every shift of light in your visual field. Research by neuroscientist Marcus Meister and colleagues at Caltech, published in Neuron in 2024, found that the brain's sensory systems gather data at approximately 1 billion bits per second.
The amount that reaches conscious awareness? Roughly 10 bits per second. 10 bits out of 1 billion. Your conscious experience of reality, the rich, detailed movie of your life, is assembled from approximately 10 bits of selected, processed, interpreted information per second. Everything else is handled below the threshold of awareness or discarded entirely. That is not a malfunction. That is the brain making a necessary choice. You cannot consciously process everything. You would be paralyzed. So the brain builds filters, and those filters are not random. They are trained. They favor novelty. They favor threat. They favor what you have been told to care about, what you have learned to fear, and crucially, what confirms what you already believe. That last one deserves its own moment. The brain's attentional filters have a known bias. They preferentially select information that is consistent with existing beliefs and existing emotional states. This is one of the most replicated findings in cognitive psychology, documented across decades of research into confirmation bias and attentional cueing. A person in a state of low-level anxiety will find more threat in the environment than a person in the same environment who is calm, not because the threat is objectively greater, but because the attentional filter is tuned to locate it. A person who believes they are disliked will notice the one neutral expression in a room of friendly faces and remember it longer than any of the smiles.
We don't see the world differently because we think differently. We see the world because our attention moves differently, and attention moves according to the emotional and cognitive state we carry into each moment. Marcus has been convinced since approximately his third week in a new job that his manager doesn't respect him. It started with a meeting. The manager glanced at her phone while Marcus was speaking. That was it. One glance. In the weeks that followed, Marcus began noticing other things. The way she rarely initiated conversation with him, the time she gave a project to a colleague without consulting him first, the meeting she ran without asking for his input. Each piece of evidence felt solid, concrete, undeniable. What Marcus did not register, or registered and quickly forgot, was the afternoon she specifically mentioned his work to a senior director, the two instances where she advocated for his timeline when the client pushed back, the fact that she rarely initiated conversation with anyone because she was an introvert managing a demanding workload. Marcus's attentional filter was not lying to him exactly. Everything he noticed was real. The phone glance happened. The projects were distributed as he described. But his filter was curated, tuned to find confirmation. And the brain is very good at finding exactly what it is looking for, which means it tends to find it whether or not it's actually the dominant truth of the situation. This is not a character flaw in Marcus. It is the standard human operating system running as coded. The question, as always, is whether you know the filter is running.
Consider a belief you hold about someone close to you, a belief that feels factual, self-evident, confirmed by experience. Now ask, what would I have to notice or stop ignoring for that belief to be incomplete? Not wrong, not false, just incomplete. That slight softening from "this is true" to "this may be partial" is one of the most practically useful shifts in perception available to a human being. Here is something the brain cannot tolerate: a gap. Not a physical gap, a narrative gap, an unexplained sequence, a cause without an effect, or an effect without a cause. When information arrives incomplete, which it almost always does, the brain does not shrug and say, "Insufficient data, I'll wait." It fills the gap immediately, automatically, with the most plausible story available. This is not a bug. It is, again, a survival feature. A world full of incomplete information is dangerous. The organism that waits for complete information before acting is the organism that gets eaten while it's still gathering data. So the brain evolved to close loops, to infer, to construct narrative continuity where raw experience offers only fragments. The neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga, working with split brain patients from the early 1970s onward, first with Roger Sperry at Caltech, later with Joseph Ledoux, identified a mechanism he termed the left brain interpreter, a system dedicated to generating explanations for behavior and experience, even when the actual cause is unknown or inaccessible to the speaking hemisphere. The concept was formally introduced through their collaborative research, with Gazzaniga and Ledoux describing it in detail in their 1978 work. In their experiments, when patients performed an action driven by the isolated right hemisphere, which the speaking left hemisphere had no access to, the left hemisphere would immediately confabulate a reason. It would invent an explanation, confidently, without any awareness that it was inventing. The patient wasn't lying. They were doing what all brains do. They were narrating. And here is the critical thing. The narrator doesn't know it's narrating. It believes it's reporting. This process runs continuously in your daily life. You make a decision to leave a job, to end a relationship, to order one thing rather than another from a menu, and within seconds, sometimes within milliseconds, a story assembles itself. I chose this because I value stability. I left because I deserve better. I ordered the salad because I'm taking care of myself. The story feels like the reason. It feels like the thing that preceded the choice and produced it. Research in cognitive psychology has demonstrated repeatedly that in many cases, the explanation arrives after the choice, shaped by emotion, habit, prior conditioning, and dozens of factors below conscious awareness. The narrative follows, swiftly and convincingly, to explain what the brain has already decided. This is not a reason to distrust every decision you make. It is a reason to hold your explanations for your decisions with a degree of honest curiosity. Because the story you tell yourself about why you did something shapes everything that comes next. It shapes what you believe about yourself, what you believe yourself capable of, what you believe you deserve. A story constructed on incomplete or misread data, told confidently, repeated internally, reinforced by selective memory, becomes over time something that feels like identity. And some of those stories are quietly limiting in ways their narrator never intended. There's a man, call him David, who has believed for 20 years that he is not a creative person. He knows when this began. He's 11 years old, in an art class. He draws something he's proud of. A teacher looks at it, says something dismissive, not cruel, just careless, and moves on. David's brain in that moment did what brains do. It looked for a story that explained the feeling. The story it produced was simple and efficient. I am not good at this. I'm not that kind of person. One data point, one moment, one offhand comment from someone who probably forgot it by lunchtime. And from that point forward, David's attentional filter began its work. Every time he attempted something creative and it felt difficult, the filter flagged it. See? Confirmation. Every time he saw someone else produce something beautiful, the filter noted the contrast. That's not you. The story grew, not because more evidence arrived, but because the filter kept feeding it. At 41, David joins a pottery class because his therapist suggests it. He expects to fail. He is, after all, not a creative person. He's known this for 30 years. He makes something. It is clumsy and uneven and slightly lopsided. He loves it completely. The story was never the truth. It was a narrative assembled from one bad moment, sustained by selective attention and mistaken for 3 decades for a fact about who he was. What story are you carrying that began as a single data point? Not a pattern, not a lifetime of evidence, just one moment, one comment, one failure, one look on someone's face that the brain turned into a conclusion and then spent years confirming. You don't have to dismantle it today, but you might ask, is this story describing me, or has it been constructing me? Here is a small experiment for this week. Step 1. Identify one story you tell regularly about yourself, about your abilities, your tendencies, or your limitations. Something that begins with, I'm just not someone who, or I've always been the kind of person who. Step 2. Trace it. Find the earliest moment you can remember that seems to support it. Ask honestly, was that one moment representative, or was it just loud? Step 3. For 7 days, consciously notice any evidence that complicates or contradicts the story. Not to replace the story, just to see what the full picture might contain. The goal is not to convince yourself of anything different. The goal is to notice that the story has a construction date, that it was assembled, not discovered, and that means, with patience and honest attention, it can be revised. If narrative assembly is how the brain makes sense of the present, memory reconstruction is how it makes sense of the past. And here is where things get genuinely strange. Most people operate on a model of memory that goes something like this. Experience happens, the brain records it, and when you want to remember it, you retrieve the recording, like pulling a file from a cabinet. This model is almost entirely wrong. Memory is not storage. Memory is recreation. Every time you remember something, you are not replaying a recording. You are rebuilding the event from fragments, from inference, from your current emotional state, from things you've been told about it since it happened, from the stories you've constructed around it. The psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, in her landmark study conducted with John Palmer, demonstrated precisely how malleable human memory is. They showed participants film clips of car accidents, then asked questions about what they had seen. The critical manipulation was a single word. Participants asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other, gave significantly higher speed estimates, averaging around 41 miles per hour, than those asked the same question using the word contacted, who averaged around 32 miles per hour. And more disturbingly, a week later, participants who had received the word smashed were more than twice as likely to report having seen broken glass at the scene. There was no broken glass. One word, asked after the event, was enough to introduce a detail into memory that never existed. This is not a vulnerability unique to weak or suggestible minds. It is a feature of how memory works in virtually all humans. Loftus and Palmer's findings have been replicated extensively and form the foundation of what researchers now call the misinformation effect, the well-documented phenomenon by which post-event information merges with and alters the original memory trace. This has profound implications for how we understand our own histories. The childhood you remember, the parents you experienced, the wounds that shaped you, the moments that made you, these are reconstructions. They carry emotional truth, they are real in their effect, but they are not transcripts. They are interpretations, built by a younger version of you, with a younger version of your understanding, and subtly revised every time you've revisited them since. Which means the story of your past is, in a quiet sense, always being written in the present. The memories that feel most fixed, the ones you have returned to again and again, are paradoxically the ones most shaped by the returning. Each retrieval is an opportunity for the brain to slightly edit, slightly update, slightly color with the emotional tone of today. You are not remembering your childhood, you are recreating it with the tools and perspective available to you now. That is, depending on how you look at it, either unsettling or deeply hopeful. If the past is reconstructed, it is not entirely fixed. The meaning you carry forward from it, the story you tell about what happened and what it made you, is not locked in amber. It can be revisited with honesty, with new context, with the understanding that the version of you who first encoded that memory was doing their best with the tools they had at the time. This is not an invitation to revise history toward comfort or denial. It is an invitation to hold your personal history with the same gentle skepticism you might offer to any account told by a single imperfect witness, even when that witness is you. You just traveled through 4 of the most consequential mechanisms in human psychology, not as abstract theory, as live architecture running inside you right now, shaping what you notice, what you remember, what you believe about yourself and the people around you. So the question this section asks is a practical one. Now that you know the construction is happening, what do you do with that? The answer is not to become suspicious of your own mind. It is not to second-guess every perception until you are paralyzed by epistemological doubt.
That is not the goal, and it would not be useful. The goal is something more modest and more powerful: to become a curious witness to your own experience, to develop the habit of asking, gently and without judgment, is this what I'm seeing, or is this what I expected to see? That question, practiced consistently, changes the quality of attention you bring to everything. Let's talk about what this looks like in three specific areas of daily life: relationships, decision-making, and self-perception. The single most common source of relational friction is not conflict, it is mismatched perception. Two people experience the same event and walk away with genuinely different accounts, not because one is lying, but because each brain filtered, predicted, and reconstructed according to its own history and emotional state. Understanding this doesn't resolve conflict automatically, but it changes its texture. When you know that the other person is not describing the objective event, they are describing their brain's version of the event, something softens. You stop needing them to admit they're wrong. You start getting curious about what they perceived and why. This is not naivety. It is not the same as agreeing with everything someone says or abandoning your own account. It is the recognition that two people can both be reporting their genuine experience and still be describing something quite different. That recognition, held genuinely, not just intellectually, is the beginning of real conversation, the kind where something actually changes rather than two people taking turns defending their perceptual constructions at increasing volume. Remember what we established about narrative assembly. The explanation for a decision arrives after the decision, not before. The brain produces a post hoc story and presents it as the reason. This means that when you feel certain about why you made a choice, especially a significant one, a small pause is worth building in. Not to paralyze the decision, but to ask, is this explanation actually the driver? Or is it the story I'm telling myself to justify a preference that came from somewhere else? Sometimes the honest answer is, I don't fully know why I want this, I just do. And that is a more honest starting point than a confident explanation that is actually a confabulation. Decisions made from acknowledged uncertainty tend to be more flexible and more revisable than decisions made from confident stories, because when the story turns out to be incomplete, as stories often do, the person who knew they were operating on incomplete information can adjust. The person who believed they had the full picture is more likely to double down. This is, perhaps, the most tender application. We established that the self, the you experiencing all of this, is itself partly a narrative, a story assembled from selected memories, filtered experiences, and interpretive frameworks built long before you were old enough to evaluate them. That story is not false, but it is not complete. The parts of yourself you believe are fixed, the limitations you carry as facts, the labels you accepted before you had the vocabulary to question them, these were constructed by a brain doing its best in conditions you did not choose. Holding that with honesty, not as an excuse but as a context, is an act of genuine intellectual courage. You are not the sum of what your brain decided about you before you knew it was deciding. You are the person right now choosing to look at the construction and asking what you want to build next. This exercise has 3 steps and takes approximately 5 minutes. Step 1. Identify one current belief about yourself that functions as a limit, something you treat as simply true about who you are. Write it down if you can, or say it clearly in your mind. Step 2. Ask the following question honestly. When did I first decide this was true, and what was the quality of the evidence? Not to dismiss the belief, to locate it, to find its construction date. Step 3. For the next 2 weeks, treat that belief as a working hypothesis rather than a confirmed fact. Notice what happens when you enter situations that normally confirm it, and ask each time, am I seeing this clearly, Or am I seeing what I came prepared to find? That is the whole exercise. It requires no dramatic action, no confrontation with the past, no performance of change. It requires only honesty and a willingness to remain slightly uncertain about something you previously treated as settled. That willingness, small and quiet as it is the beginning of genuine perceptual freedom. When the construction feels too solid, when a perception or a self-story feels immovable and absolute, return to this. I see through a lens I can clean. 6 words, 1 reminder. The lens is real. The construction is real. But lenses, unlike eyes, can be examined, can be wiped clear, can be adjusted. You are not trapped inside your perceptions. You are the one, right now, choosing to look at them. We have covered a great deal of ground together, and yet, if you sit with what this volume has offered, none of it is truly foreign to you. You have always sensed, on some level, that your perception was not a clean window onto the world. You have felt it in the moments of surprise, when someone you thought you knew did something completely unexpected, when a memory resurfaced and felt different from how you remembered remembering it, when you changed your mind about something and couldn't quite explain why the old version of the belief had felt so certain. Those moments were not failures of understanding. They were the construction revealing itself. And here is what I want to leave you with, not as a conclusion, but as an orientation. The brain's construction of reality is not a flaw to be corrected. It is not evidence that you are unreliable or that your experience is somehow less valid because it is filtered and shaped and partly invented. Every human brain does this. Every conscious experience in every person who has ever lived has been a construction. The philosopher, the scientist, the poet, the surgeon, all of them navigating the world through a model their brain assembled, updated, and occasionally got wrong. This is not a weakness of the human condition. It is the condition itself. What changes, what becomes possible when you know this, is not a purer or more accurate perception. It is something more valuable than that. It is humility. The honest, undefensive kind, the kind that says, my version of events is real to me, and it may still be incomplete. The kind that makes space for another person's equally real, equally constructed, equally partial version to exist alongside yours, without one of them needing to be destroyed. That humility is not weakness. It is, in practice, one of the most powerful things a person can bring into a room. There is a particular quality of attention that becomes available to you once you understand how the construction works. It is not vigilance. It is not the anxious scanning of every perception for error. It is something closer to gentle curiosity, a willingness to pause briefly at the edge of a strong reaction before the narrative fully assembles and ask, what am I actually seeing here, and what am I adding? That pause is not passivity. It is precision. It is the difference between a reaction that ran on the stored program of every prior experience you've had with anything resembling this moment, and a response that takes the present moment on its own terms, with fresh eyes, with the actual data available right now. Most misunderstandings in human relationships, most of the friction, most of the accumulated distance between people who once felt close, live in the gap between those two things, between the reaction that ran on the old program and the response that might have been possible with one extra moment of honest looking. You cannot always catch it. The construction is fast. The narrative assembles before you can intervene. That is simply how the brain works, and accepting that without self-reproach is part of the practice. But sometimes you can catch it. And the more you practice looking for the seams in the construction, the more often that window opens. Consider what it would mean to move through a single ordinary day with this awareness gently present, not as a burden, not as a performance of mindfulness, Just as a quiet background question, ask occasionally and without urgency. Is this what is here, or is this what I brought with me? At the morning meeting, when a colleague's tone feels dismissive, is that what you're hearing, or is that what last Thursday's interaction trained your filter to find? In the conversation with someone you love, when a familiar frustration rises, is this moment actually repeating the old pattern, or does it simply rhyme with it enough that your brain has already filed it under the same heading? In the quiet of an evening, when you assess the day and conclude something about who you are and what you're capable of, how much of that assessment is data and how much of it is the narrator running its usual commentary? These questions are not meant to produce doubt. They are meant to produce space, a breath of room between stimulus and story, between experience and conclusion. In that space, however small, lives a version of freedom that no external circumstance can easily remove.
You began this volume with a premise that might have felt unsettling, that what you perceive is not reality, but a version your brain constructed. I hope it feels different now, because the construction is not a prison, it is a process, and processes, unlike prisons, can be worked with, can be examined, can be gradually, patiently, and honestly refined. You are not doomed to see only what you have always seen. You are not required to keep telling only the stories you have always told. The lens can be cleaned, the model can be updated, the narrative, the one about who you are and what is possible for you, is still being written. And you are the one holding the pen. So take that with you as you return to the ordinary movements of your day, not as a philosophy to defend, not as a framework to impose on others, just as a small, steady flame of honest curiosity about what you see, about why you see it, and about what might become visible if you look just once from a slightly different angle. The world you wake up to tomorrow will be, as always, partly the world and partly you. Step into it with your eyes a little wider, your certainties held a little more lightly, and your curiosity pointed gently inward, and notice how much further the light reaches.